Hello and welcome to the show that debates and deconstructs burning issues of the day. This is The Big Picture and I'm Athar Khan. The annual economic survey, which was tabled in Parliament earlier today, has stated that India's economy is likely to pick up pace in 2012-13 and grow at 7.6%. The Finance Ministry report also pegged economic growth in the financial year after that at 8.6%. While economic growth faltered to a three-year low of 6.1% in the December quarter, GDP growth in the current financial year ending March is expected to dip below 7% for the first time in 3 years. This is the third economic survey that has been presented in Kaushik Basu's tenure as Chief Economic Advisor to the Finance Ministry. The past two surveys and their recommendations couldn't be enforced effectively, by what we understand is the government's inability to generate consensus on reforms, also driven mainly by political constraints of a coalition government. Now, if you look at the economic survey, there is a strong undercurrent of positivity. Despite the low growth figure of 6.9%, the survey projects India to be one of the world's fastest growing economies. External factors notwithstanding, internal machinations also played a part in the economic slowdown. Among these, according to the survey, was the tightening monetary cycle that saw interest rates hiked for a sustained period of almost 2 years. The survey also says that the reason for a gradual economic recovery is the decline in overall investment rate. Gross capital formation during the third quarter of 2011-2012 as a ratio of GDP was just 30%, down from the 32% a year ago. Of course, these projections are based on the assumptions regarding factors like normal monsoons and reasonably stable international prices, particularly that of crude oil. Tonight on The Big Picture, we will focus on the survey itself, its findings, as well as debate the feasibility of the assumptions and recommendations made in the report. And joining me in the studio tonight are two very special guests. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Ravi Srivastav from JNU, as well as J.D. Agarwal, Chairman and Founder in Indian Institute of Finance as well. I'd like to start the show, however, with Ravi. Ravi, the economic survey states that it suggests policies to put India on a surer footing for sustained inclusive growth is what they've called it. It also suggests that rapid fiscal consolidation is the only way to keep inflation down and aim for robust growth. Now, we all know fiscal consolidation is really important. We've been hearing that from the Finance Minister, from the top policy makers inside the government and otherwise as well. But come budget tomorrow, do you expect some real strong steps towards fiscal consolidation?
By fiscal consolidation, you mean coming back to the FRBM and so on?
Yeah.
Well, I think this is going to be a budget which will reflect the fiscal consolidation mood of the government, simply because the government will have to be somewhat more profligate next year. So, I do expect that the government will make, well, if you want to say hard choices, make some hard choices this year, so that it can be more liberal with this. We can take a more expansionary stance next year.
We've had guests on the show, Ravi, that have actually come out and said, taken a hard line and said this budget could actually be the budget of tough measures. If Pranab Mukherjee wants to go the populist way, he might choose the budget the year after this budget. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, I agree that the next budget will be a budget which will be more addressed to, let's say, popular demands, popular needs and so on. And this budget will reflect the general mood of the government.
Right.
But what I would, let's say, from my point of view, how much fiscal consolidation is needed is a matter of policy choice. It's not something which, which we have to, fiscal consolidation is not irrespective of anything. It has to do with the rate of inflation and so on and so forth.
Right, right. J.D. Agarwal, coming to you. First of all, do you agree with what Ravi said? And would you see any strong tough measures like there has been a clamor for, not just from industry, not just from India, but also from otherwise policymakers and economists as well. Do you see the budget being as tough as it is expected tomorrow?
No, not necessarily. There would be probably slightly some change. What was expected before the elections in state assemblies and what may be expected now, there would be a change in this. I suppose that the government was likely to come up with a very strong, bold budget before the elections. But now the situation has changed. With the kind of situation, political situation which exists, I think the budget will emerge more like a compromise of the coalition government, because its allies have to be kept in good humor.
Right.
And particularly, the Mamata Banerjee making a hue and cry against its own party man who has been a railway minister. I mean, that indicates that the government may like to come up with certain policy measures which may try to please, its own allies.
Right. So you're saying basically that before the polls, perhaps the government had a different idea of what the budget might be, but since the Congress party especially did not really perform well in these elections, especially in UP, losing a lot of ground in UP as well as Punjab, and just barely scraping through in Uttarakhand, you're saying that he just might compromise and to keep his allies happy, just like Mamata Banerjee. Even Mulayam Singh is a very, very important part of machinations and backroom plays in New Delhi now. So you're saying that has a definite effect on what the budget will be like. Is that what you're saying?
You see, as far as Mulayam Singh is concerned, I feel that probably that may not be so much of a difficult situation because Mulayam Singh has, made promises which may amount to large amount of funds to be rolled out by the UP state government, which the government may not have that kind of funds. In that case, the funds have got to be raised through the central government or the federal government, and therefore they may like to have a compromising formula with the UPA.
Right.
But looking at the economic survey, the kind of situation which exists, like 6.9% growth rate, which was largely expected, although it was expected earlier at the time when the last budget was presented that the growth rate would be anywhere between 7.5% to 8%.
Right.
Now, keeping in view this and also the dismal performance of the industry, the IIP, I think that indicates that the government need to really take a serious look if it really wants to achieve a growth rate as it has been forecasted.
Right, fair point. Let me come to Ravi very quickly. The survey also points out that land acquisitions are very vital for India's manufacturing and infrastructure sectors. Now, but with reforms like land acquisition bills still lagging in limbo, if I could call it that, it's going to be a very tough task for the government, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the land acquisition, land has become a major issue. The conflicts around land acquisition are here with us to stay. And not only in India, we are seeing these happening even in China now to a very large extent. Therefore, how exactly, I mean, the land acquisition bill is of fundamental importance. Taking on board stakeholders, compensating them adequately in the long run, I think how the government works this out will be quite pivotal to processes of development and growth.
Right. Do you agree with that, J.D. Agarwal? Land acquisition still in limbo and it's going to be very tough for the government?
Acquisition is an important issue because in the last 6 months or so we have seen lots of farmers raising issues with regard to acquisition and going against it. But naturally the government has got to seriously look at it, but the government has certain other challenges besides the acquisition. One of the most important challenge before the government is the fiscal consolidation. Another is containing inflation. The third one is that the BJP and other opposition parties are already ready to take the government, on the corruption or the black money.
Right.
And Anna has also raised a lot of issues about it.
Right.
And I think the white paper, the government might come out with a white paper, whether it would be a part of the budget tomorrow, some announcement with
we'll have to see that, of course. The economic survey that was tabled today, Ravi, also puts a very bright spotlight on the services sector. Let's discuss that for a bit. I want to discuss the services sector because I think it's been a rather shining light in an otherwise gloomy scenario. First of all, what do you peg the success of the services sector in the past 2 to 3 years where manufacturing was failing, mining was in the doldrums, services shone like a bright light? What do you peg the success of the services sector to?
Well, I think in this sector, reforms have had a role to play. For instance, the telecom sector, certainly the fact that the government moved quite quickly to set up a regulatory apparatus, to have investment in the sector. So the whole process, I mean, for service sector, of course, has been growing in almost every country more rapidly than other sectors, except for a handful of sectors. But in this, the kind of sectors that have seen growth, the telecom sector, real estate, banking, financial services, etc., there has been an impetus in these sectors. Of course, IT, and IT, which is still classified as a services sector, IT and IT-enabled services.
Right.
But I think the challenge here is whether even this can be sustained, even though the services may continue to grow faster than other sectors. But there is now a challenge in terms of growth of the telecom sector, growth of various other sectors within the services sector.
Right. A very important point that you raised there. I'd like to talk a bit about the subsidies and what the impact it has on fiscal deficit, but that's going to be after the break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a short break, and we'll discuss what the economic survey says about subsidies, and they've also talked about direct subsidies for diesel. We'll talk about that in a while. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're still with The Big Picture, and we're discussing the economic survey that was tabled in Parliament today by the Finance Minister, Pranab Mukherjee. Now, it's a very interesting line in the economic survey, and I want to read from that. I'm quoting the economic survey now. For diesel, where even the rudimentary first step for freeing prices has not yet occurred, a possible intermediate step is to fix a per litre subsidy from the government. Now, does this seem like an indication to you, Ravi, that a step towards cutting diesel subsidy, maybe even a direct subsidy fixed for as an intermediate step before biting the bullet finally on diesel deregulation?
I think diesel subsidy is really a test case. Diesel subsidy is a test case in more ways than one, because we know that a lot of the diesel subsidy is going not for essential transportation, but is going into various other luxury forms of transportation and all that. And yet that there would be a pressure from, let's say, car manufacturers to keep the diesel subsidy going, so that more diesel cars can be manufactured and so on and so forth.
Right.
And I think I agree with the fact that if you look at internationally, there is not much difference between diesel and petrol prices. They go, with the marginal differences one way or another. I don't think there is need for a big diesel subsidy in this country at all. So I think this is certainly a test case, and we should watch which way it is going. If at all there has to be a subsidy, the government can continue to subsidize, rail freight directly, or or various other sectors of the economy. But I don't think that there is need to have such a large diesel subsidy.
So interesting, you mentioned the freight rates as well, because the furor that has been created by Mamata, I don't think the government is going to touch freights at any point, any soon. But do you agree with what Ravi just said? Is there a definite case for a direct subsidy on diesel? It sure looks like it.
You see, subsidies regime is a very serious matter. That it has to go away, as a matter of fact. It has got to be a market-driven economic system to a great extent. But at the same time, looking at the economic picture in the country, and looking also the people below poverty line, and people not able to afford even the basic necessities of life, and the way the inflation has been reigning in the country in the last 1 year, you can't really do away with the subsidies. That is one. The second thing is that the question whether you give a direct subsidy or give the subsidy the way it is being given now, I think maybe if it can continue like this is much better than giving a direct subsidy, because there can be too many holes in direct subsidy being given. Implementation of the direct subsidy regime is more difficult, more complicated, and it is more not possible to implement. Keeping in view this, I think the current state, the other way probably could be that you raise tax rates for registration of diesel cars, because that is one area which probably is attracting the attention of the people. If you raise, and the second thing is that the cost of production of diesel, processing of diesel need to be really attacked. The third thing is that probably we need to raise the production and also have the future and options used for the purpose of purchasing petrol and raw crude oil in the international market, so that we can reduce the cost of the diesel to a great extent.
Having said that, J.D. Agarwal, Ravi, digressing a little bit from the economics of it and talking about the politics of it, do you think the FM can actually politically afford to take that step, considering what the furor that Mamata Banerjee has created?
Well, you see, the question is, I think there are two separate questions which Professor Agarwal has also tackled. One is, who do you wish to subsidize? And the second is, how do you wish to subsidize? Okay. I mean, I think all of, there is a political economy which continue, for which subsidies continue for the rich, even though in principle they are meant for the poor. I think Mamata Banerjee would not disagree if subsidies are taken away from the rich. But I think she would have strong disagreement with what she thinks is the Aam Aadmi and the ordinary person. So I am there, and this is where the balance has to be struck by the finance minister.
Right, and he is obviously very experienced in doing that. Let's talk about inflation for a bit, if we could. The survey says, and this has been going on for a while now, where government policymakers have been saying that inflation will moderate to around 6.5 by March, will go even further down as the year progresses, perhaps 6.5 to 7% by March. Now, January WPI has come down to 6.55. Overall inflation is slightly higher, I think a percentage point higher than what it was before. Do you share the survey's optimism? Ravi, first you, that it will come down to 6.5 by March and go down even further. Do you think that's possible?
See, let me say that if you look at, in fact, retrospectively at this whole debate on inflation, I don't personally quite understand, and I don't think the government analysis really put the finger on why inflation, why we had inflation over such a long period. Of the kind of inflation that we had.
Right.
And neither have we fully understood why inflation has dropped in the way it has just now. So let's put it this way, that in case inflation remains low, we have certain policy option. If it goes up, we have certain other policy options.
Right.
At the moment, inflation seems to be slackening. Hopefully, we will see a period of relatively low inflation.
Right.
But of course, oil prices and the
I was going to come to that immediately.
Is really a case, it is a very worrying factor.
Right, but still talking about inflation, given the fact that the finance minister has been saying time and again on record that supply bottlenecks is one of the biggest internal factors that is mainly driving inflation. We haven't addressed those completely, have we?
Well, that's the point I'm making. If you look at the kind of supply bottlenecks which the economic survey talks about, or the sources of inflation, it says chicken, meat, fish, vegetable oils, vegetable prices. Now, unless these supply bottlenecks, if these were the sources of food inflation, can something be done in the short run? And I'm talking about a short run, a year's period, to actually ease inflationary pressure these quarters.
Right.
And I don't think that is really possible. But yet inflation has slackened. The vegetable prices have come down and so on and so forth. Maybe because as the economic survey said, because of the high base effect. That could be a case in point.
Yeah.
So I think I don't think in the short run we are going to be able to do much about the supply bottlenecks. But of course in the medium term we must tackle them very seriously.
J.D. Agarwal, thoughts on inflation?
You see, if you really look at the picture, the way it has been since April, the government has been assuring time and again that the inflation would be under control. And if we really look at the month of January, February, March, things have improved a lot. The average inflation during the year 11-12 may be anywhere around 5 to 6%. And particularly, most important thing is that the food inflation has gone down from 20.1% to 1.9%, which is really creditable. And I think the government is very serious about it. Even RBI has made, Sabha has made it very clear, because on 15th March, when he was to make the credit policy, announce the credit policy, he did not cut down on the interest rates.
Right.
Although he did cut down on the CRR by 0.75 in order to increase the liquidity of the banks, because the bank's liquidity was in serious difficulty, particularly because of the advance tax payments to be made on 15th of March by the people, and also various other liabilities and considerations. And I think from that point of view, the government is fairly done well lately in this quarter.
It's an interesting point you raised. I'd like to talk about the RBI policy and how they didn't touch any policy rates today, but that's after the break. We'll take another short break. We'll return. Lots more to talk about agriculture. The agriculture sector, the economic survey mentions very clearly. We'll talk about that and the RBI monetary policy in the days to come. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still with The Big Picture and we're still discussing the economic survey that was tabled. This is the third economic survey tabled in Kaushik Basu's time. Let's talk about Kaushik Basu for a bit. After this year, he retires. The last two economic surveys he tabled, all the recommendations really didn't hit the mark because of political compulsions and the pressures of a coalition government. Do you think it's going to be third time lucky for Kaushik Basu?
Yeah, the kind of issues, some of the issues to which he is very wedded in the area of reforms, issues like labor reforms, cash transfers, direct subsidies, and so on. I don't think that this government will be in a position, or I mean, from my perspective, actually, many of them are very debatable in any case. But I don't think this government will be in a position to implement some of these. But I would also like to note that this economic survey, by the way, is much more in sync with the political economy and the mood of the country now than the previous economic survey.
Right. J.D. Agarwal, Kaushik Basu was also in charge of that core inflation group that the Prime Minister had constituted. And he had also suggested then, like he has suggested now, that FDI and retail will take care of the gaps of infrastructure in the supply side and will tackle inflation as well. Now, agricultural growth in this economic survey is tabled at 2.5%, going upwards, going on uptick as we go along. Like I said, FDI and multi-brand retail is one of his pet subjects. He said this will help. But nobody really expects FDI and retail, multi-brand retail, to be pushed, at least in this budget. Your thoughts on that?
You see, the economic survey says agriculture has done well with 2.5% growth. I feel the agriculture has not done well, I mean, despite what economic survey says. Because India's agriculture has a potential to grow at a much higher rate than 2.5%. If we really look at the last year's situation, we find there were no floods, there were no droughts, there were no disasters, there was nothing of that sort which happened. That and despite that, if we are growing only at the rate of 2.5%, that means something grossly wrong, and the government needs to pay very serious attention in terms of financing agriculture, productivity, introducing modernization, fertilizers, educating farmers, and also, you know, a number of reforms need to be carried out.
What about multi-brand retail, FDI and multi-brand retail? Do you think that's going to be pushed at all? A lot of people think it's not.
I think there is a need. The whole world is moving around to attract FDI in their country, because investment is the key factor to generate employment, to take care of the supply side of goods, to rein on inflation, and many other factors. If you want to really grow, as the President has stated in her budget, in her opening speech, that India deserves to grow at the rate of about 9%, then we need to really have large amount of investment being made in the country. FDI is one such source where large amount of investments come in and can generate employment.
Which leads me to my next question to you, Ravi. The survey also said that India needs to attract a lot more investment, especially in the infra space. Now, what are the incentives, some of the incentives that the FM has at his disposal and could push so that we attract more infrastructure investment?
Well, just quickly going back to the multi-brand retail. See, my own reading of and I have read the estimates, I have read the background studies and so on, that the kind of investment and employment estimates which have been put out of the ministry are huge overestimates. The agriculture needs investment, but it needs investment not only, of course, it needs investment in the cold chain and so on, in marketing, but also in things like extension, in research and development, and many other areas. So I think one should not build too much hype around multi-brand retail, and I think we need more work in that area. As far as general infrastructure sector is concerned, energy is concerned, you know, roads are concerned, highways, bridges, this is an area on which we do need, you know, critical amounts of investment, foreign direct investment. And I think in the economic survey, the economic survey has actually done a good analysis of what is required in this sector, how to move forward towards stabilizing investment and attracting.
Fair point. Tomorrow is the big day finally. We're almost out of time right now. Thoughts, expectations from the budget, 10 seconds or less, we are almost out of time. J.D. Agarwal, starting with you.
I think there would be relief to be provided to the common man. The exemption limit may be raised to anywhere between 2 lakh to 2.5 lakh.
Point taken. Ravi, expectations high, mild, tempered, what do you say?
Well, I would really look at the kind of how the finance minister actually plays with the trade-offs which are now available in terms of directing expenditure and investment in the right quarters, which meant the social sector schemes and productive investment.
Right. That's where we end the show today. Tomorrow, don't forget, is the big day, budget day. Pranab Mukherjee will start his budget speech at around 11 o'clock. Rajya Sabha television will bring you the complete and extensive coverage of the budget all throughout the day tomorrow. Don't forget to watch Rajya Sabha television throughout the day tomorrow. Good night for now.